I never thought a piece of old paper could bring my past crashing into my living room on a quiet November morning. But that's exactly what happened on Veterans Day 2024, when my grandson Jake came bounding down the stairs of my Denver home, holding something I hadn't seen in over 50 years. "Grandpa! Grandpa! Look what I found in the attic." His voice carried that excitement only a 12-year-old can muster, the kind that makes everything seem like the greatest discovery in human history. I was sitting in my recliner, the same spot I'd occupied every morning for the past decade, nursing my second cup of coffee and watching the Veterans Day parade preparations on the local news. The Colorado autumn sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. My wife Margaret had passed 3 years ago, and these quiet mornings had become my routine, my anchor in a world that kept spinning faster than I could keep up with. "What have you got there, sport?" I asked, setting down my coffee mug on the side table. The ceramic clinked against the wood, a sound that seemed louder in the stillness of the house. Jake rushed over, nearly tripping over the ottoman in his haste. He thrust a faded photograph into my weathered hands, his eyes wide with curiosity. "I was looking for my old baseball glove, and I found this box of your stuff. Who are all these guys? Is that you?" My hands trembled as I looked down at the image. The edges were yellowed and slightly curled. The colors faded to that distinctive hue of photographs from another era. But I recognized it immediately. How could I not? That moment was seared into my memory with the permanence of a brand on cattle. There I was, 23 years old, standing in the Vietnamese jungle in 1971. My uniform was dirty, my face gaunt from months in the field, but my eyes still held that mix of determination and fear that every young soldier wore like a second skin. Around me stood my platoon, good men, brave men, some of whom never made it home. But it wasn't any of them that made my breath catch in my throat. On my right side, standing so close our shoulders nearly touched, was a man in different fatigue, North Vietnamese Army uniform. His face was lean, his expression serious but not hostile. And in that frozen moment captured by some unknown photographer, we looked less like enemies, and more like two young men who'd been caught up in something far bigger than either of us could comprehend. "Grandpa, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I hadn't realized I'd been staring at the photo for so long. I looked up at Jake, his innocent face full of concern, and tried to find my voice. Where did you find this exactly?" "In a green metal box. It was under some old blankets and stuff. There were medals in there too, and letters, and..." He paused, studying my face. "Did I do something wrong? Mom always said I shouldn't go through your things without asking." No, son. You didn't do anything wrong." I set the photograph on my lap, my fingers still gripping the edges like it might fly away if I let go. I haven't thought about this in a very long time." That was a lie, of course. I thought about Vietnam every single day. The sounds, the smells, the weight of my rifle, the faces of friends lost. They were all there, lurking just beneath the surface of my everyday life. But this photograph represented something different. Something I'd buried so deep, I'd almost convinced myself it never happened. Jake settled onto the floor at my feet, cross-legged, looking up at me with those bright eyes that reminded me so much of his grandmother. "Will you tell me about it, please? We're learning about Vietnam in school, but our teacher just talks about dates and battles. I want to know what it was really like." Outside, I could hear the distant sound of marching bands warming up for the parade. Veterans Day. Of all the days for this to surface, maybe it was fitting, maybe it was time. "That man standing next to me," I began, my voice rough with emotion. "His name was Nguyen Van Thand, and you're right, he was the enemy. But that's not the whole story, Jake, not even close." I looked down at the photograph again, and suddenly I wasn't sitting in my comfortable Denver home anymore. I was back in the jungle, the air thick with humidity and the constant buzz of insects, where the line between friend and enemy wasn't always as clear as the history books made it seem. "It was late March 1971, I continued, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. "We'd been on patrol for 6 days, deep in the jungle near the Cambodian border. We were exhausted, running low on supplies, and every man in my platoon was on edge. That's when everything changed." Jake leaned forward, completely absorbed. In that moment, I made a decision. I would tell him the truth, all of it. Not the sanitized version I'd given to journalists over the years, not the abbreviated story I'd shared at VFW meetings. The real story, the one that had kept me awake countless nights, the one that had shaped every decision I'd made since returning home. The morning sun climbed higher, casting new patterns of light across the room, and I began to speak. The words came slowly at first, like water through a rusty pipe, but then they flowed more freely. I told him about the heat, the fear, the constant awareness that death could come from any direction at any moment. And I told him about the day I met Nguyen Van Than, the enemy who became something else entirely, the man whose face in that photograph held secrets that had remained buried for over half a century. The morning we encountered Than's unit, the jungle was quieter than usual. That should have been our first warning. In Vietnam, silence meant danger. The birds, the monkeys, even the insects, they all knew when something was wrong before we did. We were moving through a dense section of jungle, single file, each man keeping his eyes on the soldier in front of him, while also scanning the thick vegetation on either side. I was serving as squad leader at that point, leading 8 men through territory we'd been told was recently cleared. But intelligence in that war was often hours or days behind reality. Lieutenant Morrison was 20 yards behind me with the radio operator when the first shots rang out. The sound was deafening in the thick air. Not the sharp crack you hear in movies, but a heavy, thumping percussion that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Contact! Contact left!" someone shouted, and we all hit the ground, returning fire at muzzle flashes we could barely see through the vegetation. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pressed myself into the damp earth, smelling rot and mud and my own fear. The firefight lasted maybe 3 minutes, but it felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was even more oppressive than the gunfire had been. "Sound off!" I yelled, and one by one my men called back. We'd been lucky. Only 2 minor injuries, nothing serious. But as we began to assess our situation, we heard something that made us freeze. Moaning, pain, coming from directly ahead. We moved forward cautiously, weapons raised, expecting a trap. What we found instead was carnage. 4 North Vietnamese soldiers lay in a small clearing, victims of our return fire. 3 were clearly dead. The 4th, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, was badly wounded, clutching his stomach as blood seeped between his fingers. "What do we do, Sergeant?" asked Williams, one of my youngest soldiers, his voice shaking. That was the question, wasn't it? We were trained to neutralize the enemy, to secure prisoners for intelligence, but this man was dying, and we all knew it. Standard procedure said we should call for a medevac, treat him as a prisoner of war, but we were deep in hostile territory, already behind schedule, and calling in a helicopter would reveal our position to every enemy unit in a 10-mile radius. I knelt beside the wounded soldier. His eyes met mine, and I saw something I'd tried hard not to see in enemy combatants. I saw a human being, a terrified young man far from home, bleeding out in a jungle that would claim him just as readily as it had tried to claim me. He said something in Vietnamese, the words urgent but incomprehensible to me. He reached out with one bloodied hand and grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Baxi," he gasped. "Baxi." "What's he saying?" I asked, looking around at my men. None of us spoke Vietnamese beyond a few basic phrases. I think he's asking for a doctor," said Martinez, who'd picked up more of the language than most of us. The wounded soldier's grip on my wrist tightened. He said something else, a longer sentence this time, his voice desperate. Then, with his other hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He held it up to me, and even through the blood and dirt, I could see it clearly. A young woman holding a baby, both smiling at the camera. My stomach twisted. I had a similar photograph in my own pocket, Margaret pregnant with our daughter, taken just before I shipped out. "Sir, we need to move," Lieutenant Morrison said, appearing at my shoulder. "We're sitting ducks here." He was right. Every second we stayed was a risk. But looking into that dying man's eyes, seeing that photograph, I couldn't bring myself to simply walk away. "We treat him," I said, surprising even myself with the certainty in my voice. "Sergeant, he's NVA. Oh, we treat him," I repeated more firmly. "Williams, break out the medical kit. Martinez, help me stabilize him." For the next 20 minutes, working with trembling hands and basic field medicine, we did what we could. It wasn't much. The wound was too severe, our supplies too limited, our training too basic for something like this. But we tried. The soldier, I would later learn his name was Nguyen Van Than, remained conscious throughout. His eyes never left my face as we worked, and I saw the moment he understood what we were doing. The fear in his expression shifted to something else. Confusion maybe, gratitude, recognition of a shared humanity in the midst of inhumanity. He spoke again, softer this time, his hand still clutching that photograph. Martinez leaned in close, trying to understand. He's saying thank you. He's asking us to send the photo to his family. He's giving us an address. Martinez's voice cracked. Sir, I don't think he's going to make it. I knew he was right. Despite our efforts, Thun was fading. His breathing had become shallow, his skin pale beneath the tropical tan. But then something unexpected happened. We heard voices, Vietnamese voices, calling out from the jungle, more of them. We were about to be surrounded. We've got to go now, Morrison hissed. Sergeant, we're out of time. I looked down at Thun. His eyes were closing, but his hand still gripped that photograph. In that split second, I made a decision that would haunt and define me for the rest of my life. Help me move him, I said to Martinez. What? Sir, we can't. Help me move him into the shade at least. Make him comfortable, his people are coming. We did it quickly, dragging him gently to a spot beneath a large tree where the ground was softer. I took the photograph from his hand, and his eyes flickered open one last time. Your family will know, I said, even though he couldn't understand English. I promise they'll know. He seemed to understand the tone, if not the words. His lips moved in what might have been a smile. Then we ran. We grabbed our gear and moved as fast as we could through the jungle, hearing shouts growing louder behind us. We'd given away our position, risked our lives, for an enemy soldier who was probably dead within minutes of us leaving. Williams asked me later, as we trudged through the growing darkness toward our extraction point, why I'd done it, why I'd risked all our lives for that. I didn't have a good answer then. I'm not sure I have one now, sitting in my living room 53 years later, looking at my grandson's expectant face. Sometimes, I told Jake, the right thing and the military thing aren't the same thing, and sometimes you have to choose which kind of man you want to be. But Grandpa, Jake interrupted, his brow furrowed in confusion. If he died, how did you end up in a photo together? That doesn't make sense. He was right, of course. I'd been circling around the heart of the story, the part that still seemed impossible even to me. I thought he died too, I said quietly. For 46 years, I thought he died in that jungle. I carried his photograph with me through the rest of my tour. I tried, when I got home, to find an address, to contact his family. But everything was chaos after the war. South Vietnam fell in 1975, and the whole country was turned upside down. My letters came back undelivered. The address he'd given us didn't exist anymore, or maybe it never had. Communication in that war was confused at the best of times. I paused, taking a sip of my now cold coffee, gathering the courage to continue. I lived with that failure for decades. It was a weight I carried, maybe my penance for surviving when so many didn't. I'd wake up sometimes seeing his face, that photograph of his family. Margaret knew about it. She was the only one I ever told the whole story to. So what happened? Jake pressed, his impatience endearing in its innocence. In 2017, there was a Veterans Reconciliation Program. They'd been happening for years, actually, but I'd always avoided them. The idea of going back to Vietnam, of facing those memories head-on, I couldn't do it. But that year, on what would have been Margaret's 70th birthday, I decided I needed to go, for her. She'd always said I needed to find peace with what happened over there. I could still remember the morning I'd made that decision, standing at Margaret's grave in Fort Logan National Cemetery, the Colorado wind cold on my face. She'd been the strong one, always pushing me to face things I wanted to bury. The program matched American veterans with Vietnamese veterans for a week of shared activities, discussions, healing. It was held in Hanoi. I almost backed out a dozen times, but something kept pushing me forward. The trip had been overwhelming from the moment I stepped off the plane. The heat, the humidity, the sounds and smells, they'd all come rushing back, 50 years collapsing in an instant. But modern Vietnam was also nothing like the country I'd left. Hanoi was vibrant, bustling, full of life and energy. On the third day, we had a formal dinner. About 40 American veterans and 40 Vietnamese veterans, all of us old men now, gathering in a hotel conference room to share a meal and our stories. I was sitting at my assigned table when the Vietnamese veterans began filing in. I stopped, the memory so vivid it was like being there again. The clinking of dishes, the murmur of nervous conversations, the awkward politeness of old enemies trying to be civil. I saw him before he saw me. He was thinner, his hair completely white, walking with a slight limp. But his face was unmistakable. It was the young man from the jungle, aged 50 years, but still somehow the same. My heart stopped, Jake. I literally couldn't breathe for a moment. What did you do? Jake whispered. Nothing at first. I just stared. I thought I was losing my mind. that the stress of being back in Vietnam had broken something in me, but then he turned, scanning the room, and our eyes met. The moment Nguyen Van Than recognized me, his reaction was identical to mine: shock, disbelief, a hand rising to his chest as if to keep his heart from leaping out. We stared at each other across that crowded room, and time seemed to stop. He walked over to my table, slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact. When he reached me, I stood up. Neither of us said anything for what felt like an eternity. Then he did something I never expected. My voice caught, and I had to pause. Even now, 7 years later, the emotion was overwhelming. He embraced me. This man I thought I'd left to die, this enemy soldier, wrapped his arms around me and held on like I was a long-lost brother. And I held him back, Jake. I held him and I cried. For the first time since coming home from that war, I really cried. Jake's eyes were glistening now too. Did he speak English? Enough, and there were translators. We sat together that night and he told me his story. After we left, his unit did find him. They got him to a field hospital. The treatment we'd given him, the few minutes of first aid, it had bought him just enough time. He survived barely, spent months recovering. The bullet wound gave him chronic pain for years, but he lived. He got to go home to that woman in the photograph, got to watch his son grow up, became a grandfather himself. I pulled out my wallet and showed Jake a newer photograph I kept there. Than and me at that dinner in Hanoi, arms around each other's shoulders, both of us smiling through tears. It was this photograph that had somehow ended up mixed with the old ones in my attic box. He told me he'd spent years trying to find me too. He'd kept my unit designation, my name. Martinez had told him during those frantic minutes in the jungle. After the war, when things stabilized, he'd tried to reach out, to thank the American soldiers who'd shown him mercy when they could have just as easily left him to die or finish the job. That's amazing, Grandpa, Jake breathed. We spent the rest of that week together. Every activity, every discussion, we sat side by side. We talked about the war, yes, but also about our lives after, our families, our regrets and our hopes. We talked about the things we'd lost and the things we'd found, and somewhere in those conversations, I found something I didn't know I needed: forgiveness, not from him, but from myself. Than had told me something during that week that I'd never forgotten. Through his translator, he'd said, "We were both young men following orders, caught in something neither of us chose. What you did that day, you chose humanity over orders. That choice saved my life, but it saved your soul too. I've lived 50 more years because of your compassion. You've suffered 50 years because you thought you'd failed. Now we're both free." Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing everything I'd told him. Outside, the Veterans Day parade had started. We could hear the marching bands, the cheers of the crowd, the celebration of service and sacrifice. "Do you still talk to him?" Jake finally asked. "Mr. Than?" I smiled. "Nguyen. We use first names now. And yes, we email regularly. His grandson taught him how to use a computer. We video chat once a month. His English has gotten better. My Vietnamese is still terrible, but we make it work." What I didn't tell Jake, not yet, was that Than was sick. Lung cancer, probably from Agent Orange exposure during the war. The same chemical that had caused health problems for so many American veterans had devastated Vietnamese soldiers and civilians even more severely. Thas had told me 6 months ago. The doctors gave him maybe a year. "What was the point of the war, Grandpa?" Jake asked suddenly. "If you and Nguyen could be friends, if you were just two guys following orders, what was it all for?" It was the question every veteran of every war eventually had to confront, the question that had no good answer. "I don't know, Jake. I've spent 50 years trying to answer that question, and I still don't know." Politicians and historians can argue about communism and domino theories and geopolitical strategy, but down in that jungle, on the ground, it was just young men killing other young men because someone told them to. The only meaning I've found is in the choices we made within that meaningless situation. I picked up the old photograph again, studying it more carefully now. I'd been so focused on Than's presence that I hadn't looked at the context, but now I saw it clearly. This photo was taken at that dinner in Hanoi, not in the jungle. Someone had posed us together, probably for one of the reconciliation program's promotional materials. Somehow it had gotten mixed in with my old war memorabilia. "You know what the really strange part is," I continued. "That moment in the jungle, those 20 minutes when we chose to help an enemy soldier. It seemed so small at the time. Just one decision, in one firefight, in one war. But it rippled forward. affecting not just Than's life, but his son's life, his grandchildren's lives, and mine too. Margaret used to say that the measure of a person isn't in the big moments, but in the small choices we make when no one's watching, when doing the right thing costs us something. Jake nodded slowly, his young mind wrestling with concepts that had taken me a lifetime to understand. "There's something else you should know," I said, reaching into the drawer of my side table. I pulled out a letter, still in its envelope, arrived just last week. This came from Than's son. He's a doctor now living in Ho Chi Minh City. He named his own son after me. Can you imagine that? A Vietnamese family, 3 generations removed from the war, and they named their child after an American soldier. The letter trembled in my hands as I read parts of it aloud to Jake. "My father speaks of you often. He says you showed him that even in war, even between enemies, there is room for compassion. This lesson shaped how he raised me and how I am raising my children. The war took much from our country, but your kindness that day gave us something back. Hope that humans can choose mercy over violence, even when violence is expected." "Wow," Jake whispered. "The photo you found today, it's important, Jake. Not because of what it shows, but because of what it represents. It's proof that we're more than our worst moments, more than our country's conflicts, more than the roles we're forced to play. Underneath all the uniforms and ideologies and politics, we're just people, just human beings trying to survive, trying to protect what we love, trying to make it home." The parade sounds grew louder outside. Soon the street would be filled with veterans, young and old, celebrating their service. I'd marched in that parade for years, wearing my medals, waving to the crowd. But this year I thought this year would be different. This year I'd stand on the sidelines with Jake, and I'd think about Than, about all the Vietnamese soldiers who had no parade, no medals, no recognition for their service and sacrifice. "Can I ask you something, Grandpa?" Jake said quietly. "Anything, son. Do you think the war was wrong?" It was the question he'd been building toward all along. I took a deep breath. "I think wars are always wrong, Jake. Even when they're necessary, they're wrong. They take young people with their whole lives ahead of them and put them in situations where they have to kill or be killed. They destroy countries, families, futures. But the soldiers, American, Vietnamese, whoever, they're not wrong. They're just doing what their country asked of them." I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after sitting so long. I walked to the window and looked out at the parade preparations. Flags rippled in the autumn breeze, red and white and blue against the Colorado sky. After Margaret died, I went through a dark period. I questioned everything, my service, my choices, my life. I wondered if any of it had mattered. But meeting Than again, learning that those 20 minutes in a jungle half a century ago had meaning, had consequences that rippled forward into good things, it gave me peace I didn't know I needed. Jake joined me at the window, and I put my arm around his shoulders. "That photo you found, I want you to keep it. Not hidden in a box in the attic, but somewhere you'll see it. Let it remind you that every choice matters, even the small ones, especially the small ones. When you're faced with a decision between doing what's expected and doing what's right, remember that moment in the jungle." Outside, the parade was starting. We could see the color guard marching past, followed by veterans from different eras. World War II survivors in their 90s, Korea veterans, Vietnam veterans like myself, then Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan. An unbroken chain of service and sacrifice, each generation called to their own version of that jungle, their own impossible choices. "Will you tell this story at school?" I asked Jake. "When your teacher talks about Vietnam?" He nodded seriously. "If that's okay." "It's more than okay. It's important, because the stories they'll tell you in textbooks, they're about battles and strategies and dates. But the real story of war is in moments like this, in photographs like this one, in the spaces between enemy and friend, where human beings make choices about who they want to be." My phone buzzed, a text message from Than's grandson, sent from halfway around the world. "My grandfather wanted me to tell you Happy Veterans Day. He says to remember, we were never really enemies, just 2 men who met in the wrong place at the wrong time and chose to see each other's humanity." I showed Jake the message, and he smiled. "Are you going to go to the parade, Grandpa?" he asked. "No, I think not this year. This year I think I'll stay home and write a letter to an old friend. Tell him about my grandson who found a photograph and asked all the right questions. Tell him that the peace we made between us is being passed down to another generation." Jake hugged me tight, and I held him close, thinking about all the years, all the pain, all the questions that had led to this moment. The photograph sat on the table where I'd left it. Two old men who'd once been enemies, now bound together by a choice made in a moment of chaos, a choice that had echoed across decades and continents. Outside, the parade continued, the celebration of service and sacrifice rolling on as it had for generations. But inside my Denver home, I'd found something more valuable than any medal or ceremony. I'd found proof that even in humanity's darkest moments, compassion can survive, can grow, can change everything. I picked up the photograph one more time, studying the faces, mine and Than's, weathered by time but smiling, alive, together against all odds. Jake was right to be confused when he first saw it. It didn't make sense in the context of war, but that was the point, wasn't it? The best parts of being human often don't make sense in the context of war. They transcend it. As the sounds of the parade faded into the distance, I sat down at my desk and pulled out my writing paper. "Dear Nguyen," I began, the words flowing easily now, unburdened by secrets or shame. "Today my grandson found a photograph, and in finding it, he gave me a gift I didn't know I needed. A chance to tell your story, our story, the story of two enemies who chose humanity." The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting everything in gold, and I wrote on, knowing that somewhere in Vietnam, an old friend would read these words and understand that the mercy we'd shown each other in a jungle 50 years ago had finally come full circle, planted seeds that were still growing, still bearing fruit in ways we never could have imagined. The war had tried to make us enemies, but in the end, we'd proven something more powerful. That compassion once given never truly ends. It ripples forward through time, through generations, through the lives it touches and transforms.